Welcome to the pre-workshop for physiotherapy practice educators on race and racial inclusivity in practice placement. I'm Dr. Yetine Dairo, Associate Professor of Physiotherapy. I'm doing this narration which will inform you about the project background, explain how the co-creators work together, the research that informed the project, and what happens next.
In January 2021, the Health Education England funded a project to develop and pilot test a technology-enhanced training program initially aimed at physiotherapy educators, but hopefully it would also be useful for other healthcare professionals, especially those who supervise other clinical students. The aim of the training is to enhance awareness, understanding of race and racism and its impact, and to help clinicians to develop strategies so that they can supervise without prejudice. The project steering group consists of physiotherapy students drawn from different HEIs across England, physiotherapy practice educators from various settings, and physiotherapy academics. I'm one of the 4 academics in the project group. My name again is Dr. Yetine Dairo, and I'm an associate professor of physiotherapy at Buckinghamshire New University. My 3 other colleagues are Dr. John Hammond, he's also an associate professor of physiotherapy at Kingston and St. George's. Dr. Mary Norris, a reader in physiotherapy at Brunel University, London, and Dr. Annabel Williams, a senior lecturer in physiotherapy from Oxford Brookes University. We also had contribution and support from HE representative in the person of Ganesh Balaya.
Our student co-creators were Nadine Ishani, Mohammed Adris Aslam, Lynette Mills, Kieran Parkinson, and Daniel Ogbuvbu. Our practice educators were Tora Brown, Suk Wong, Shanice White, Pilar Bustamante, and Deborah Konu.
Previous studies have shown that students from minority ethnic background want to be represented in any training resources that is developed to help their experience. Therefore, the aim of the group was for academics, students, and clinical educators to work together in order to co-design a training resource to raise awareness of racial discrimination and support the development of appropriate management strategies within physiotherapy practice education initially. And hopefully those resources can also be shared with other healthcare professionals. So how did the co-creators work together? We started by agreeing on attitudes and behavior from the outset. I'll share some of the outcome of that, what we discussed and agree on the next slide. We also discussed roles and we make sure that everything was shared so that everybody was fully represented. And we agreed on how to manage disagreement, which was to refer to the project team.
We discussed many things as part of our grand roles. The key ones were that we wanted to have very good communication within the group. We wanted to ensure that everyone is listened to. So listening was one that came up time and time again. We were very keen that we have respect for one another, even when you disagree with people's point of view. And we wanted to be very, very open and non-judgmental. At this point, I want to tell you about some of the previous studies that led us to this project. The three studies that I'll be talking about are all UK based and specific to physiotherapy, so very relevant to this context. There are other studies out there which you might find helpful, and I will encourage you at the end of this workshop to try and spend some time looking at research in this area. This is so that you can be better informed about racial issue and inclusivity in practice education. They may also help you to monitor your progress or development in this area. This first study was by Ryan et al. In 2017. They looked at attrition in physiotherapy. Of all the factors considered, the main predictor was ethnicity. Students from Asian and Black background had by far the highest risk of attrition, which was significantly different to their white British counterparts. The second study was done by Norris et al. In 2017. It was a large multi-center retrospective study across several higher education institutions in the southeast of England. The study looked at the award situation in physiotherapy pre-registration education, and they found that there was an award gap based on ethnicity, with students from Black and Asian background disadvantaged. There was a high odds for white British students to do better than those from other backgrounds. This advantage was most significant in assessment that can be observed, for example, OSCE and clinical placement. And this was one of the reasons why we focused on placement for the training package. The third and final study was carried out by Amand et al. In 2019, and the study focused on the experiences of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic students. Of all the three studies, this is probably the one I found the most difficult, probably because it resonates with my own experience of racism and microaggression, not just as a student, but even as a practitioner. In brief, the student felt like they were the outsider, and this consciousness of being an outsider was not helped by the fact that the profession is defined by white normative view. And they felt that the ideal character was subject to cultural stereotypes. So if you didn't look the part or come from certain background, immediately you stood out and you felt very much like the outsider. They also didn't feel that people's responses helped them. If anything, what the people around them say amplified this different. For example, they cited the awkward use of terminology or just being dismissive of the presence of racism. And there was no, often there was no acknowledgement or management of racism in practice or microaggression. As a consequence, this student had to develop personal strategies like working really hard, working harder than their peers, in order to excel. And they've also had to regulate their behaviors and avoid conflict, sometimes removing themselves from situations just, to avoid conflict. It wasn't helped by the lack of or absence of role model, and as you can imagine, it was emotionally draining. There was an emotional labor attached to these personal strategies they've had to develop over time. What are the implications of these findings for research and for practice? Practice educators may not be aware of ways in which this present or even aware of appropriate actions to support students from a minority ethnic background. The support of practice educator is highly valued by students to support their success on placement. And this is not just restricted to issues of race. All students on placement value the support of their educators to be able to succeed on placement. The previous research shows that students and educators wanted to be part of the solution. So in particular, students from Black and Asian and minority ethnic background, they were very clear that they wanted to be part of any solution to improve their experiences, hence the co-creation. And the student wanted their voice to be heard safely, which is why we use actors as part of delivering the training package. The co-creators joined the project group in November 2021, about 11 months after the project started. And this slide shows the project outline from when they joined. So we went through a developmental phase, which included defining ideas and working on the prototype for the training package. And the original plan was that we pilot the training and evaluate it between April and July. But because of some delay in the project, the evaluation was extended beyond July 2022. To balance those of the views from research from students, we carried out a scoping event on the perspective of educators. And this scoping event was done very early on in the project cycle. We carried it out in February 2021. There was a lot of interesting findings from that scoping event, which was very well attended. I think there were about 70 people attended that scoping event. We found some discriminatory behaviors and some behaviors considered facilitatory to inclusion. And so we've presented them in two tables. So on the left-hand side are the challenges or discriminatory behavior, while on the right are behavior considered facilitatory to inclusion. And I'll just give you some time to look at the slide because there's quite a lot to take in there. So the next thing is to talk about the workshop. The aim of the workshop is to share and discuss student experiences on placement in order to understand and reflect on our roles as clinical educators and start the process of changing practice so that we're more inclusive in our approach. The learning objective, we've written these over the next two slides. The first one is the cognitive part of the workshop, and I'll give you a few minutes to just read this slide. The next slide is the affect. And so to be able to reflect on personal response to case scenarios, which we'll share during the workshop, to identify personal biases through self-reflection, and to reflect on potential personal, social, and institutional factors which may impact either positively or negatively on student experience within their work context. And we also encourage you to to have an action after the workshop, so that you reflect on your clinical workplace and identify potential assumption, risk, and opportunities. You should also identify specific action to take within the workplace to create a more inclusive educational experience for all the students you have, irrespective of their background. And you should consider potential action to appropriately respond if witnessing racism towards students, even if they're not your student. It could be student of other colleagues, it could be your student. Um, and to also identify local resources and policies that can support a student who is subject to racism while on placement. And finally, to identify resources and policies that can support your continued personal development. We don't anticipate that this will be done overnight because Rome was not built in one day, but we hope that people will make progress and take steps towards developing and improving themselves in the area of inclusivity. We would like to thank you for the interest you've showed in inclusive education, and we hope that you will find the workshop a valuable space to listen, to think, to discuss, and continue your journey to develop support and promote inclusivity. Thank you very much.